Hey, this is Dan from Gigaboots.com and welcome to the first episode of Pixel Bitching, the series where I enlighten you on the various graphical and gameplay problems in miscellaneous modern-day games. This first episode is of the Sonic Generations demo, so let's get started. Let me cover the stylistic and graphical decisions that work counter to the gameplay first. One of the most important strengths of 2D gameplay is the player's ability to easily discern objects from each other. The crispness of 2D graphics and design allow the user to more easily judge distance, speed, and distinguish characters from the environment and enemies, so it is because of this that I found a lot of the graphical techniques used are counterproductive. The lighting system complicates the imagery unnecessarily when it comes to Sonic, darkening him when he's under an overhang, or reflecting green-tinted light onto him when he's standing on grass, which is all the time in Green Hill Zone. I understand it's a nice looking technique that's realistic, but that's clearly not what they're trying for here, as evidenced by the flowers that are retro and super flat, and the checkpoint restart graphic which is just weird in general. It's supposed to look like a CRT TV turning on, but it's just strange because Sonic dying wouldn't turn off a TV. I get CRT TVs are retro, but whatever, I just found it strange. And lastly, the giant Sonic head popping out of the sign at the end of the levels is clearly not realistic, so I don't see what the purpose of a realistic lighting system is here. Another graphical effect that looks nice in most cases but just fails here is motion blur. Sonic moves fast, we all know that, it's in his name, but they felt to make him look like he's moving really fast they had to use motion blur. The problem is in their implementation. If they wanted the motion blur to look like he's going fast, then it should have been applied to the background, not to him. I don't condone them doing that as it works counter to the 2D advantage I mentioned before, but blurring the subject and not the environment does not make him look like he's going fast at all. There's another much larger problem with the motion blur though. The motion blur is applied in relation to how Sonic moves relative to the screen. What that means is it's not based on how fast he's moving, but just on how fast he's moving relative to the camera. This fucks up visually in a number of common cases. For example, when Sonic hits this spring here, he's propelled to the right at a high speed, but since the camera moves faster than him to catch up, the motion blur goes out ahead of him. The end result is the Sonic is moving really quickly to the right, but also projecting his motion blur out ahead of him because the camera is moving right faster than him. Not only is this superfluous and visually convoluted, but most importantly, it doesn't make any fucking sense. The background not blurring and Sonic blurring relative to the camera is extremely confusing and makes no sense. The resulting image is just convoluted and strange. Also, Sonic blurs as he descends from a normal height jump. Are we to believe that the rate of descent from a 3 or 4 foot jump is so extreme that it can blur relative to an observer's perspective? The motion blur is just bullfuck. It's unnecessary, it's retarded. Whatever, moving on. I appreciate the lack of motion blur on the background, but this is probably just me here. The depth of field annoys the crap out of me. I would like to be able to see the background clearly as it's nice scenery, and adding depth of field is completely pointless if you're going for a retro look. Last problem I'll note here in the graphics department is the fact that the game runs at 30 frames per second. For those who don't think frame rate affects gameplay, you're wrong. Go read the article provided in the link below this video where Neversoft co-founder Mick West explains how frame rate correlates to responsiveness in video games. Generally, games that run at 30 frames per second take twice as long to respond as 60 frame per second games because the game measures the controller inputs and affects the game world half as often. Why is this important? Because for those who forgot, Sonic is about speed. To be fast and careful, one must respond in time. Removing responsiveness from a Sonic game is like removing drifting from Ridge Racer or Nathan Drake from Uncharted. It's not the same game. It feels weird and wrong. Not only does it feel sluggish, but it looks choppy at higher speeds, because get this, moving really fast at slow frame rates looks disjointed. Here are clips of Sonic Generations, Sonic 4, and Sonic 2. Can you guess which of these games runs at 30 frames per second? Yeah. The decision to run at 30 frames per second was made so it could graphically compete with other contemporary games, but that's the wrong choice to make. They've negatively affected gameplay so they could look prettier. Now don't get me wrong, some games and genres can run at 30 frames per second and be fine, but gosh darn it, 2D Sonic isn't one of them. Before I cut to a montage of stuff that's weird about the demo, I want to note something. The circle button crouches, and the square button can make Sonic spin dash. Why the hell did they change the controls? It's supposed to be classic Sonic levels, and more importantly, those controls aren't comfortable in the least. What the hell were they thinking?